A single ingredient that you have in your kitchen makes ants flee from your garden bed in a few hours, without any poison. But when I went to understand why it really works, I discovered something that changes everything in pest control. Welcome! Today, we are going to face a problem that anyone who has a vegetable garden knows. A garden bed, a pot, or even some herbs on the balcony. I'm talking about ants, those tireless and perfectly organized little creatures that manage to transform your well-tended garden into a real battlefield. And that's not all. I'm going to show you why all those classic tips circulating on the internet don't work the way you imagine. And then I'll show you the only method that is cheap, natural, and works so well that the ants abandon your garden bed on their own in 3 days. So stay until the end, because the most important information, the reason why this method fails for most people, will only appear in the second half of the video. Very well, let's begin. Imagine the following situation. It's the beginning of the season. You finally planted your lettuce, your tomatoes, and your peppers. You spent weeks preparing the soil, making compost, setting up the beds. Everything is growing beautifully. You go out in the morning with a coffee in hand, look at the bed, and feel satisfaction. You see the seedlings getting a little bigger every day. The stems are stronger, and new leaves are appearing. It's a good feeling. You planted something, and it is thriving. And then one day, you lift a lettuce leaf and see dozens, maybe hundreds of ants running along the stems, the leaves, and the soil around the roots. They move in perfect rows, like a miniature army that knows exactly where it is going and what it is doing. And worse, you notice that aphids have appeared on the underside of the leaves, those little green or black dots that suck the sap from your plants. The leaves start to curl and turn yellow. The plants look weak and tired. And here we come to something that many gardeners miss completely. Ants don't just fail to attack these aphids, they actually raise the aphids there. They literally raise aphids like we raise cows. Because the aphid releases a sweet liquid that ants love. And there's more. Ants carry the aphids to new and healthy plants to get even more of this treat. It's a perfect arrangement for the ant and the aphid. Great for them, but disastrous for your garden. Absolutely everyone who has a garden knows this scenario. And it's frustrating because you're trying to grow healthy food without poison. You want to do things naturally, and then you have an army of insects undermining all your effort. And they really undermine it because ants build giant underground colonies under the beds, disrupting your plant's root systems. And now comes the moment when most people turn to poison. You buy some granules at the garden store, throw them in the bed, and hope the problem disappears. But what actually happens? First, these granules cost money and are only enough for one bed. Second, these poisons go into the soil, the same soil from which your tomatoes, cucumbers, and lettuce will later come. Third, and most importantly, these poisons usually only kill the ants you see on the surface. But the colony is down there. The queen stays well protected in the depths, producing thousands of eggs a day. And a week later, you have exactly the same problem in the bed that you had before. So, poison is out of the question. I think we agree on that, right? Here we are looking for natural, cheap, and truly effective solutions. And that's exactly why I spent the last few weeks testing various methods to show you the only one that makes sense. But before getting to it, we first need to resolve an important issue. All those tips circulating on the internet that don't work in practice. Or, to be more exact, they work, but not the way you imagine. Let's go through the 3 most popular ones. Tip number 1, vinegar. This is probably the most widespread tip you'll find. You mix 1 part vinegar with 1 part water, put it in a spray bottle, and spray it on the ants. And you know what? It really works. If you hit the ant directly, the acid in the vinegar kills it. The problem is that you'll only kill those specific ants that you happen to see. And how many are on the surface? 10? 20? 50? Meanwhile, there are tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands in the colony. Additionally, vinegar evaporates very quickly in the sun. After an hour or two at most, the effect disappears, and the ants that come later no longer smell any vinegar at that spot. So what do? They simply come back. Vinegar is like putting out a fire one flame at a time. Technically it works, but in practice, you only solve a fraction of the problem. And there's one more thing that almost no one mentions. Vinegar is acidic, and when you spray the bed with it repeatedly, you gradually acidify the soil. Most vegetables like a neutral or slightly acidic pH, but if you overdo the vinegar, it can do as much harm as poison, especially with more sensitive plants like beans or peas. And now imagine walking around the garden, spraying vinegar on the bed every other day, all summer long. It's not just laborious, it's above all useless, because you'll never solve the problem definitively this way. Ants have an enormous reproductive capacity, and as long as the queen is alive, the colony rebuilds itself all the time. You would be treading water all summer. Tip number 2. Cinnamon. Another popular tip: you sprinkle cinnamon on the anthill or on the ant trails, and they go away because they can't stand the smell. It sounds beautiful, it's natural, smells good, and costs little. So, what's the catch? The catch is that cinnamon indeed repels ants, but it doesn't kill them. And this is a fundamental difference. When you sprinkle cinnamon in one place, the ants will avoid that spot. They will simply find another path and go around the obstacle. So, in reality, you've only pushed them a little further away, from one bed to another, from the tomato to the pepper, from the lettuce to the kale. You haven't solved the problem, you've just moved it. And often it happens that the ants displaced this way occupy an even larger area than before because they are looking for new food sources. The result can paradoxically be worse than if you had done absolutely nothing. And another practical issue: cinnamon in the garden bed only lasts until the first rain. As soon as it rains or you water the bed, the cinnamon dissolves, penetrates the soil, and the effect disappears. You would have to sprinkle it every day, which is not only impractical but also expensive if you use good cinnamon. And believe me, the cheapest cinnamon has such a weak smell that ants often ignore it completely. Tip number 3. Baking soda. I have seen this tip in many videos and articles. You mix baking soda with powdered sugar in a 1-to-1 ratio. You sprinkle it on the anthill, and the ants will eat it because the sugar attracts them, and the baking soda will disrupt their digestive system. Sounds logical, right? The problem is that this only works in a very limited way. Ants are smarter than we think. The workers that collect food will even try this mixture, but they will realize very quickly that something is wrong. And what do they do then? They stop taking the mixture to the colony. And this is the crucial point. If the substance doesn't reach the queen and the larvae, you haven't solved anything at all. You killed a few workers, but the colony remains alive. Additionally, the powdered sugar in the bed attracts other insects: wasps, flies, ants from other colonies. So instead of one problem, you might suddenly be dealing with 3. So, summarizing these 3 methods: vinegar kills, but only on the surface and only for a while. Cinnamon repels, but only transfers the problem elsewhere. And baking soda seems logical, but the ants stop spreading it quickly. All 3 methods share a common problem. They act on the surface and don't reach the heart of the colony. And if you don't reach the queen and the nursery, the colony will always renew itself. So, what really works? And here we come to the center of the whole video, and the answer might surprise you because the ingredient I'm going to talk about is something you almost certainly have somewhere at home. And if you don't, You can buy it at any pharmacy for a few dollars. I'm talking about boric acid, which is sold in pharmacies as a white powder. Sometimes you'll find it under the name borax, although borax and boric acid are not exactly the same thing. They have slightly different chemical formulas, but for our purpose, both work very similarly. And now you might say, wait a minute, that's not from the kitchen. And you're right. It doesn't come directly from the kitchen, although borax has been used historically even to preserve food, and is still added to some cleaning products today. But the main point is that it is a natural mineral substance, not a synthetic chemical. And this is a fundamental difference. Boric acid occurs naturally in nature. You find it in some mineral sources, in seawater, and in volcanic areas. It's nothing artificial, nothing created in a laboratory. But let's get to the most important part. Why does boric acid work so well on ants? The whole principle is based on a brilliant property. Boric acid doesn't act instantly, and that is exactly its greatest advantage. When an ant comes into contact with boric acid, it doesn't die on the spot. Instead, it swallows it and carries it in its body and takes it back to the colony. There, it shares the food with the others, with more workers, with the larvae, and finally with the queen. Ants practice something called trophallaxis, mutual feeding, where they pass food from mouth to each other. And it is through this mechanism that the boric acid gradually spreads through the entire colony. And now comes the main effect. Boric acid disrupts the ant's digestive system gradually, slowly, over 1 to 3 days. An ant that consumed it will still have time to pass the contaminated food to other members of the colony before it dies itself. And those next ones will pass it to even more. It's like a domino effect that spreads from the edges of the colony to its center, to the queen. This is, in fact, the reason why boric acid works much better than any other homemade method. It uses the ant's own social structure against them. Their greatest strength, the ability to cooperate, share resources, and function as a collective, becomes their greatest weakness. The better organized the colony is, and the more efficiently the ants pass food to each other, the faster the poison spreads. There is something ingenious in the simplicity of this. And when the queen dies, the colony ends. Without the queen, there is no reproduction. No one produces new workers, and in a few days, the entire structure collapses. The queen is the heart of the colony, the only one capable of reproducing. When she stops functioning, the entire superorganism collapses like a house of cards. And now we move on to the most important part: how to prepare it correctly and how to apply it correctly. Because I really want to emphasize this. If you do it wrong, it won't work. And unfortunately, most people do it wrong. Here are the exact instructions. You need 3 things. Boric acid powder, which you buy at the pharmacy. It costs a few dollars and lasts for the whole season. Next, you need sugar, common refined sugar, and you need water. You mix 1 teaspoon of boric acid, 3 teaspoons of sugar, and add about 200 milliliters of warm water. You stir until everything dissolves, and it's ready. The entire preparation takes 2 minutes. Now you take some small containers, preferably glass lids or any shallow, flat container. You pour the solution inside, and here comes what is absolutely crucial: where to place it. You don't look for the anthill. Don't try to find the entrance to the colony and pour the solution inside. This is the mistake most people make, which I mentioned at the beginning. I'll explain why in a moment. Instead, look for the trails. Ants don't walk randomly. They have well-defined routes where they go back and forth. You recognize them easily. They are rows of ants walking in one direction while others return. Most of the time, they go from the garden bed to the edge of the garden, a wall, the compost bin, a tree. And it is exactly on these trails, not the anthill, but on the trails, that you place your little containers with the solution. Why on the trails and not on the anthill? I'll explain that in a moment in the part about the crucial error. Now, some more important details. The time of day. Late afternoon or early evening is ideal. Why? Because ants are more active in the warmer hours of the day, but not at the peak of the heat. When it's very hot, the ants stay underground, but at night, when the temperature drops to a pleasant range, they come out in search of food with everything they've got. So, if you place the containers at this time, you have the best chance of them finding it quickly. The quantity. For a garden bed of about 3 meters by 1, 2 or 3 containers are enough. You place them along the trail at intervals of about 1 meter. Don't place the bait too close to each other. You want the ants to have time to pick it up and carry it away. The weather. This is important. If the forecast is for rain, wait. The rain will dilute your solution or wash everything away. It's best to do this during a period when the forecast indicates 2 or 3 days without rain. This will give the ants enough time to discover the bait, collect it, and spread it through the colony. And one more thing. Don't combine this with other methods. If at the same time you spray vinegar or sprinkle cinnamon, this will repel the ants from the places where you place the bait. And that is exactly the opposite effect of what you want. You want the ants to find this bait, not avoid it. And speaking of finding valuable information, if this video is being useful to you and you want more tips on gardening without poison, press the subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. I'm preparing many practical guides for you, so it's very worth staying around. And now, back to the ants. We are reaching the part you've been waiting for since the beginning. The error that most gardeners don't know. And that is exactly the reason why so many people claim that natural methods don't work. The error is simple but fatal in its consequences. People pour the ingredient directly into the anthill. It sounds logical, right? You have an ant problem, you find the anthill, you pour the poison in there. Done. Except, that's exactly where the trap lies. When you pour anything, be it boric acid, baking soda, or any other substance, directly into the entrance of an anthill, the ants immediately register it as a threat. And what do? They close that entrance. They simply collapse it, bury it, and open a new one a few inches away. An anthill always has many entrances and exits, and ants are masters of adaptation. When you close one entrance, they have a new one a few hours later. And worse, if the ants sense a dangerous substance near the anthill, they increase their vigilance. The workers that go out to look for food become more cautious. They avoid anything unknown. This means that even if you later place the bait on the trails, the chance of them taking it decreases significantly. So, paradoxically, by trying to hit the anthill directly, you achieve exactly the opposite result. The ants entrench themselves, become more cautious, and your bait goes to waste. That's why it's so important to work with the trails, not with the anthill. On the trail, the ant is in food collection mode. It is looking for nourishment. It is programmed to collect anything sweet or nutritious and take it back to the colony. When it finds your bait on the trail, a small container with a sweet solution, it doesn't treat it as a threat. It treats it as a food source. And that is exactly the point. And there's more. Ants on a trail communicate with each other using pheromones. When an ant finds a food source, it leaves a pheromone trail behind, which attracts more and more ants to that source. So, your bait, thanks to the ant's own behavior, spreads more effectively than you could ever manage on your own. And there's one more aspect that is rarely talked about. An anthill can be deep, up to several meters below. The queen stays at the bottom, protected by layers of tunnels and chambers. Even if you poured 1 liter of solution directly into the anthill, the probability of it reaching the queen is minimal. Ants have a drainage and ventilation system in the anthill. They usually drain away any liquid that enters before it penetrates to the right depth. Meanwhile, when the bait is on the trail, the ants themselves, voluntarily and actively, carry it exactly where you need it, deep inside the colony, straight to the queen and the larvae. You don't need to look for anything, dig anything, or pour anything into holes. You let the ants do the work for you. And you know what the most beautiful part of this is? This principle works not only with garden bed ants, but with practically every species of ant you find in the garden. Whether it's the common black ant or the larger species that make mounds on the lawn, the mechanism is always the same: trophallaxis, the sharing of food, and the gradual diffusion of the substance through the entire colony. Now, I wanted to pause and share a personal experience with you. I tried this method for the first time 3 years ago, when ants completely took over my strawberry bed. It was midsummer, the strawberries were starting to ripen, and I discovered that half the fruit was spoiled. The ants were making holes in them and the fruit was rotting. Additionally, the strawberry leaves were completely covered in aphids that the ants cared for with dedication. I had already tried cinnamon. I had already tried vinegar. I even used commercial granules at one point, and none of that helped in the long run. The ants always came back, always. Sometimes the next day, sometimes after a week. But they came back every time. I was starting to feel like I couldn't do anything and that I would have to give up on that bed. But then I stumbled upon the information about boric acid and told myself I was going to give it a chance. And when I used the boric acid bait on the trails for the first time, the result, to be honest, surprised me. On the morning of the second day, I saw that ant activity around the bait had clearly increased. This is a good sign. It means they discovered it and are carrying it to the colony. I confess I panicked for a moment because it seemed like the situation was getting worse. But then I realized that's exactly how it's supposed to be. The ants come to the bait and distribute it. On the third day, activity dropped sharply, and on the fourth day, the bed was practically at peace. A few stray ants walking aimlessly, no organized columns, no trails, and the aphids that the ants previously protected became easy prey for ladybugs and other predators that appeared in the bed immediately without their guardians. That year, I finally harvested beautiful, healthy strawberries, and since then, I use this method every time ants appear in a bed. This leads me to an important point I wanted to emphasize. Ants themselves are not pests. In fact, they play an important role in the ecosystem. They aerate the soil, decompose organic matter, and are part of the food chain. The problem only arises when the colony settles right inside your garden bed and starts raising aphids there. Then, from a beneficial insect, they become a nuisance that needs to be resolved. And that's exactly why the bait method is so elegant. You don't mess with the entire garden ecosystem. You target specifically the colony that is causing you trouble. Ants in other parts of the garden that don't bother you and are doing useful work are not affected. If I had to choose the most important thing I've learned in years of gardening, it would be this: the best gardener is not the one who poisons everything that moves. The best gardener is the one who understands how nature works and learns to cooperate with it. And this method is exactly about that. You don't use brute force. You don't use poisons that kill everything around. You use the ants' natural behavior, their own system of collecting and distributing food, and turn it against them. But let's go back to practical questions. Let's say you placed the bait, waited 3 days, and the ants still haven't disappeared. Now what? First, don't panic. Sometimes it takes a day or two longer, especially if the colony is very large. Huge colonies can have up to 500,000 individuals, And then the substance needs more time to spread everywhere. Second, check the bait. If the containers have dried out, top up the solution. On hot days, water evaporates faster, and if the bait is dry, the ants lose interest. Third, see if you place the containers in the right place. Are they really on the trail where the ants walk, or did you place them off to the side? Observe the movement of the ants and adjust the position of the containers. And fourth, and this is something people often forget, see if you didn't use a solution that was too strong. Paradoxically, this error is as common as pouring it into the anthill. When you put too much boric acid, the bait starts killing the ants too quickly. And that's a problem. Why? Because an ant that dies on the trail won't have time to carry the bait to the colony, and the other ants that see their dead companions around the container start to avoid it. Nature is simply smarter than we think. That's why this ratio is so important. 1 teaspoon of boric acid to 3 teaspoons of sugar. Nothing more than that. This concentration is low enough for the ant to survive long enough to carry the bait to the queen, but high enough to ultimately eliminate the colony reliably. Now, let's see what happens after those 3 days, when everything goes as it should. Have you ever tried to imagine what an anthill looks like inside when the colony collapses? It's a fascinating process, although from the ant's point of view, it's obviously tragic. First, the workers that consume the bait directly die. Then those that received the contaminated food from them through trophallaxis die. Gradually, the number of ants capable of caring for the larvae and the queen decreases. The larvae stop being fed and start to die. Finally, the queen also dies because there is no one left to feed her. The entire process takes about 2 to 5 days, depending on the size of the colony. With smaller colonies, say 10 to 20,000 individuals, it's faster, 2 to 3 days. With large colonies of hundreds of thousands of ants, it can take up to a week. On the surface, you recognize this when the organized rows of ants on the trails disappear. Instead of them, you'll see only isolated individuals moving chaotically, without a clear goal. These are the last survivors who have lost contact with the colony. In the following days, they will also disappear. And now, the pleasant part. What happens to the aphids? The aphids that the ants previously protected suddenly lose their defenders, and nature takes care of them on its own. Ladybugs and other natural predators take over. But while there were ants in the bed chasing these predators away, the aphids were safe. When the ants disappear, the natural enemies return and reduce the aphid population to a minimum in a few days. So, in practice, you solve 2 problems with 1 move. You get rid of the ants and the aphids, and you do it without any synthetic chemicals. Let's summarize the entire process in simple steps now, so you can remember it easily. Step 1. You prepare the bait. 1 teaspoon of boric acid, 3 teaspoons of sugar, 200 mmol of warm water. Mix. Done. Step 2. You find the ant trails in the bed. You don't look for the anthill. You look for the rows of ants. You place the containers with the solution directly on these trails at intervals of about 1 meter. Step 3. You wait and don't combine methods. No vinegar, no cinnamon, no additional interference. Let the ants carry the bait to the colonies themselves. You should see results in 3 days. For larger colonies, just wait 5 to 7 days and then enjoy a garden bed free of ants and aphids. Now, some bonus tips to help prevent ants from coming back to your bed. Tip 1. Mulch. If you cover your beds, ants have much less chance of building a colony there. Mulch retains moisture in the soil, and ants prefer a dry environment for their nests. A layer of 5 to 10 centimeter of straw, hay, or wood chips, for example, can significantly reduce how attractive your beds are to ants. Tip 2. Companion planting. Ants don't like certain plants. Lavender, mint, basil, thyme. These are all herbs whose strong smell naturally repels ants. If you plant these herbs on the edges of the beds or between other crops, you create a natural barrier that makes life difficult for the ants. Tip 3. Regular inspection. Once a week, take a walk through your garden and look for new ant trails. The earlier you catch the problem, the easier it is to solve. A small, new colony with a few thousand individuals reacts to the bait much faster than an established colony that has been there all season. Additionally, a small colony hasn't had time to infest your plants with aphids on a large scale, so the damage will be minimal. Preventing is always better than putting out fires. Tip 4. Soil care. A living and healthy soil, full of earthworms and microorganisms, is less attractive to ants than compacted, dry, and poor soil. Compost, organic fertilizers, green manure, all of this contributes to making your soil an environment where ants won't want to settle. Ants need soil for their nests that they can dig easily and that maintains its shape. Loose soil rich in organic matter is less stable for them, so they prefer to choose another place. Tip 5. And this is something that is almost never talked about. Watering. Ants build nests in dry soil. If you water the bed regularly, you maintain a moisture level that doesn't please the ants. Of course, don't water more than your plants need. Excess water is also a problem, but if you notice the soil in the bed is dry and cracked, that's an invitation for ants. Mulch combined with regular watering creates a much less attractive environment for them. And one more additional tip. If you have fruit trees where you see ants climbing the trunk to the aphids on the leaves, try placing an adhesive band around the trunk. It's a wide strip of sticky paper that you wrap around the trunk. The ants can't cross, and the aphids on the tree are left without protection. But this doesn't replace the bait method. It's a complement that specifically protects the trees. Have you ever stopped to think how much money gardeners spend per year on chemical pest control products? And yet, many of these problems can be resolved with simple, cheap, and natural methods. The entire solution we're talking about today costs very little. A pack of boric acid costs a few dollars and lasts the whole season, maybe even 2. You have sugar at home, the water comes from the tap, and the effect is more effective than expensive commercial products. But that is exactly the philosophy of this approach. You don't need to spend a lot of money for your garden to thrive. You just need to understand how nature works and work with it, not against it. Let me quickly answer some questions that appear most frequently on this topic. Question: does this also work with ants inside the house or apartment? Yes, the principle is exactly the same. Inside the house, it works even better because ants have limited space, and the trails are usually very clear along baseboards, around windows, or in the kitchen near the sink. You place the containers along these routes and proceed exactly like in the garden. The only difference is that inside the house, you need to take special care if you have small children or pets. Place the bait container behind furniture or under a cabinet, in places where a child or animal can't reach. And inside the house, I highly recommend using a glass lid turned upside down because it's stable and won't tip over. Question: can I use dry powder instead of the solution? You can, but the solution works better. Dry powder is harder for ants to transport to the colony. Additionally, the wind scatters it more easily, and the rain washes it away. A sweet sugar solution is much more attractive and natural for ants. It matches their preference for liquid food sources. Question: what if I have several anthills in my garden? Go slowly. Start with the one that causes you the most trouble. After you solve it, move on to the next one. Don't try to face all the anthills at once. You'll need more containers, more solution, and monitoring becomes more difficult. It's better to solve one problem properly than to spread yourself across 5 fronts. Question: can I leave the bait in the bed permanently as a prevention? I don't recommend it. Use the bait purposefully when you have a problem. Leaving the bait in the bed long-term can unnecessarily affect ants that aren't bothering you and fulfill a useful ecological function. Additionally, the solution in the container dries out over time, gets dirty, and loses effectiveness. Now, I wanted to address some safety issues because it's important that you know what you're working with. Boric acid, in the right concentration, is relatively safe for humans. It is used in eye drops, in contact lens solutions, and in cosmetics. But that doesn't mean you can eat it by the spoonful. Be sensible when working with it. Don't mix it with bare hands if you have sensitive skin. And, above all, keep it out of reach of children and animals. As for the garden bed, the concentration we use in the bait is very low. We're talking about a teaspoon dissolved in 200 milliliters of water. It's such a small amount that it has no measurable impact on the soil, the plants, or the vegetables you'll harvest from that bed. But for safety, place the containers on the edge of the bed, not directly between the plants. And after the operation is over, that is, after 5 to 7 days, remove the containers from the bed. And one more important observation: boric acid is toxic to bees. This is something you need to keep in mind. If you have flowering plants in your garden that bees visit, place the containers so that the bees cannot access them. An ideal solution is to cover the container with, for example, a large flower pot turned upside down, in which you drill some small holes in the bottom, large enough for the ants, but too small for the bees. This way, you protect the pollinators and, at the same time, ensure that the bait remains accessible to the ants. I wanted now to put this whole subject into a larger context. Ants are fascinating creatures. Their social organization is one of the most complex in the animal kingdom. Each colony functions as a superorganism. An ant alone has practically no individual intelligence, but the colony as a whole exhibits incredibly sophisticated behaviors. They can build complex underground structures with temperature and ventilation regulation. They can organize logistics chains over distances that, in proportion to their size, are equivalent to human journeys of hundreds of kilometers. They wage wars, sign truces, grow fungi, and keep other insects in captivity. Did you know that ants have existed on Earth for about 130 million years? They survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, the ice ages, and enormous climate changes. They are incredibly adaptable and extremely resilient. It is estimated that there are 10 quadrillion of them living in the world. It's a number we can't even imagine. And their combined mass is roughly equal to the combined mass of all human beings on the planet. They are some of the most successful organisms in the history of life on Earth. And yet, when this incredible civilization starts destroying your tomatoes, you have to remove it from that bed. And that is perfectly fair. Jardinagem is about balance, about how to share space with nature while extracting from it what you need. This doesn't mean declaring war on ants in your entire garden. It means protecting your bed in a conscious and purposeful way, while the ants in other parts of the garden continue their useful work. And to finish, I wanted to share with you a personal conclusion that matured in me over years of working with the earth. Nature is not your enemy. She is your partner. And the best gardeners are those who have learned this. Ants are not bad. Aphids are not bad. They are organisms doing what they were programmed to do. And your job as a gardener is to find the balance, protect your harvest, and at the same time, respect the nature around you. I want you to leave this video with an understanding, not just with a recipe. An understanding of how ants work, why they do what they do, and how you can use their own behavior to protect your bed. Because When you understand the principle, you can apply it in any situation, not just the specific one I talked about today. And that is the most valuable thing you can gain. Not just instructions, but understanding. Because a gardener who understands nature is always more effective than a gardener who follows recipes with their eyes closed. To close, a quick summary of the entire video. First, ants in the bed are a problem, mainly because they raise aphids, disrupt roots, and weaken plants. Poison is expensive, harmful, and only solves the surface of the problem. Second, classic tips like vinegar, cinnamon, and baking soda don't work in the long run because they don't reach the heart of the colony. Third, the boric acid method works because it exploits the natural behavior of ants. The slow action gives them time to carry the contaminated food to the queen. Fourth, a key error is pouring directly into the ant hill. The right place for the bait is the trails. Fifth, the right concentration is 1 teaspoon of boric acid to 3 teaspoons of sugar in 200 milliliters of water. And sixth, after the ants are removed, nature takes care of the aphids on its own. Natural predators return to the bed and reduce the population. In the next episode, I'll show you how to get rid of slugs without beer and without poison. Take care and much success in your garden. Until next time, if this story changed how you look at the tiny invaders in your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the natural secrets that have been hidden for too long. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next treasure of knowledge will be opened very soon.